Now we're beginning into cognitive behavioral therapy. Now, one thing you need to keep in mind as we shift between solution-focused therapy and move into cognitive behavioral therapy, I want you to remember that we will stack the techniques. So it does not mean that what you have learned already, that we're going to just do away with that. No, we're going to take the structure of solution-focused and now we will put it on top as a technique with cognitive behavioral. So we're building upward and not doing away with. Now we're going to talk about the main schools of theory of counseling. Now, most of the theory will be included in your reading, but I want to talk about a little bit of the shift as you go through the counseling theory, schools of theory. How did therapy and counseling shift in the theory? So if we start out, we can say, looking at Freud and looking at a psychodynamic approach. And you can look at the dates there that was before 1900. And Freud was actually a psychiatrist. Before, he was actually predating psychiatry. He was a neurologist in Vienna. And he was studying the effects of childhood and the deeper inner developments of a person as what needed to be changed in the counseling process. And where did he get these ideas from? Well, Freud had the idea from the church. He noticed, although Freud himself was Jewish, he noticed that the local residents went to the church, they went to confession, and confession had a very positive impact on them. So actually the concept of counseling, or talk therapy as we know it today, originates from a Christian modality of healing of the mind, body, and soul. So then we shift to the next school of counseling in psychology, and that would be behavioralism. And we've all probably at some point in time took a class and talked about B.F. Skinner and how he did the analysis with the rats in the lab. And the emphasis was on we need to change the behavior of the person. Then came the school of client-centered counseling. And people like Carl Rogers, who really saw the importance was more about connecting with the client. And Rogers wanted us to listen more and be very client-centered. Then you had the cognition revolution, where you had Gestalt. And Gestalt said, well, you have to accept the self. That's the issue, is we've got to look at the self and get in touch with the self. And then finally, which is where cognitive behavioral rests, is in the cognition school of psychology, where you had Beck and Ellis, who demonstrated and created thoughts in schools of theology. So let's just take an example of a type of therapy. What would each of these schools say is actually the cause, and what's the aim of the treatment? Well, psychodynamic, or Freud, they would look at the early childhood development. They would say it's in the unconscious, which are things that get centered in us when we're children. And so you need insight, self-insight, and reflection, and interpretation. The counselor actually gives the interpretation to reduce the anxiety of the client. But Client Center with Rogers, they said, well, you really have to come to understand and accept yourself. And so therapy and counseling becomes about personal growth and self-insight. The School of Behavioralism, or Skinner, they said, well, you have non-constructive behaviors. And let's just modify the behavior. And especially with desensitizing the behavior or making it uncomfortable to perform the behavior so you can shift and create new behaviors. With the School of Cognitive Psychology, things started to focus on cognition and thought. And Beck was very focused on what are you thinking? And you need to change your thinking because what you're saying to yourself and your thoughts are not very productive, and you need to modify those. So as we talk about these different and various schools of theology or psychology, you can see there's a difference between, are we talking about what the person thinks? Is it their emotions? Is it the behavior? Is it physical attributes in the body? Is it somatic cognitions and applications we're looking at? Or is it more developmental and self-acceptance? So you can look at theory from a lot of different angles, but in cognitive behavioral, we're going to be looking more at cognition.